Welcome back to Teach a Man to Fish channel. In today's video, we're going to be doing home butchering in your own kitchen. Let's go ahead and get started. Doing this style of home butchering actually starts with the initial clean. You're going to want to use your standard process where you're breaking that carcass down into the hams or the hindquarters, front quarters, but you're going to be putting the whole torso and saving that because that's what you're going to use to break down further. When you're taking the shoulders off, they separate very easily right along the lines when you pull, and you'll leave some of that flap meat, I guess I call it, there with the torso, and then trim the neck down some so that you're left with a minimal amount of those neck roasts. You can use those as you normally would. As with most butchering, it's helpful to have somebody else there to catch, but you don't have to have it in this circumstance. And the reason why we put that in the black bag is we're going to be putting this into a wet aging process, and that's where it'll sit in the refrigerator for ideally 7 to 8 days. We'll talk more about that later in the video. This meat saw is a great saw, but you struggle a little bit when it bites into the bone, and it's cutting on the forward stroke just like any other saw does. That's where another set of hands to keep that stable while the saw is biting into the bone is a helpful part of the process. When the cut goes through, I like to leave a little bit of meat dangling, and then I can come in with my knife and drop it straight into the bag and take it away. This cut is made right where the hams join the torso, and you're kind of catching the V that's formed where the torso runs up into the hams. This meat sat in the refrigerator for 7 days. I usually like to get between 8 and 15 days. You get a better quality, more tender meat. The game flavor drops out. Aging is definitely the way to go, and if you don't have a fancy process, in a bag in the fridge works too. So we've got this deer already broken down out from its primals, which means the hams and the shoulders already taken off. It's a pretty large and intimidating piece of meat, but just know as we work our way through it, it gets smaller and smaller and easier to manage. If you've got access to an aging shed like my buddies in the video right here, it is definitely the way to go. The quality of meat that you get from that, you can even hang for weeks at a time, as long as 4 weeks, and it completely changes the flavor, intensifies it, increases the tenderness. Come back for a future video, and I plan on building our own aging shed eventually.
Color on that's nice.
Yeah, it's dark. I'd say it's dark.
First of all, let's talk about the 3 things you have to have in order to have spoiled meat. You've got to have higher temperatures, you've got to have contamination, you've got to have moisture. A wet aging process, you're taking away the temperature. That meat is taking the time to relax. Enzymes begin to work. The gaminess drops out of the meat. Watch your contamination during the cleaning. You want to try and keep your process clean. No dropping in the dirt, clean knives. Don't stick it in a cooler full of ice water and let it age in that manner. If you're using your meat, looking at it, working at it, and it comes out snotty and brown, does not look appetizing, that means you're doing damage to that meat. You're taking away from the quality. Aging, whether it's wet or dry, temperature control, watch your contamination, the gaminess almost completely disappears from the meat. Preparation and getting to this point, that's, let's see, entrance and exit. There's the entrance hole there. This deer was arrowed perfect, went through the top of the heart, came out through here in the front shoulder. Most of the shots that I take are through the boiler room, heart-lung shots. You do get some damage. You've got to keep in mind that those ribs, those sections of meat aren't necessarily good, and you'll have to cut those out, and we'll deal with those ribs as we get further to breaking this torso down. We do like our holy meat. If you look at the tools that we've got, it looks like there's a fair amount there, but you can get away with pretty much just a saw and a knife in this if you're getting started out. Our first tip here is to tell you to put a wet towel underneath your butcher block. You have no idea how much that will help in preventing, as you have to wrestle with this meat, you've got to apply force to it, running your saw through it. It prevents that butcher block from sliding around. It sticks right there to the surface. Definitely a good tip to learn from this. The first thing you're going to want to do is split that brisket or that breastbone right down the center so you get access to all of the chest cavity and the ribs. Next, you're going to want to locate that final rib. You'll feel the ribs will start to cut up towards the backbone, and you want to score in a straight line all through the meat, banging across the ribs. That way you're creating a channel that your saw can cut through. We also cut away that belly flap. That can go into the trim pile for grinding up later. With the deer, there's not a whole lot of weight for you to work against and leverage against. So it's a bit of a awkward process using the saw to cut through the ribs, but you just grip, hold tight, figure out the best way to hold it, and cut through in that forward motion. There's a lot of people that don't like rib meat off of deer. I think it's fantastic if cooked well. Repeat the same process on the other side. Next, we're going to locate about 5 or 6 vertebrae back, and you take the point of your knife and find the gap in the vertebra and mark it, and that's where you're going to make your next cut with the saw. When you think about the tools that you're using to butcher your deer at home, there's not a whole lot of expense that needs to be done in it. Sure, I've done butcher videos with band saws, whole deer, cutting up steaks, but this style of butchering is completely manual, and these tools do not cost a fortune. I'll put a link down below where you can find some of these tools. Pick them up from Amazon. They're worth it. Then cut down through the rib to that mark that you just made, and you're clearing the meat away that you're going to put the saw blade through till you hit the backbone. Then finish your cut, a little bit of meat that you left, with your butcher knife. We'll break the front end where the short ribs are down into a couple of deer lollipops, as well as pull the backstrap out of it. Next, locate where those rib ends. That's going to be the next saw cut that you're going to make. Same thing, cut down to the meat, down to the backbone, and you'll notice that we're avoiding the inner loins, or the tenderloins are there in the center of the chest cavity, right there where the hips were. Poke around with your knife again, find where that vertebra is open, mark it, and that's where the saw cut is going to go. As with all the Teach a Man to Fish videos, the skills compound one on top of the other. Knife sharpening leads to butchering, leads to storage, leads to cooking. The Teach a Man to Fish video channel concept builds further and further, and the learning never stops. I would be totally remiss if I did not give credit to one individual for a lot of the learning that I'm doing. He's a true artist when it comes to butchering meats. Great videos. He's on Facebook. He's on YouTube. His name's Scott Ray. He's even published author. Got some books out there. He's doing roebucks and I forget the name, lamb and other. They're smaller creatures than we do, but they all have the same muscles. They're all set up the same. Check him out. He's an artist. Now we're going to clean up those rib ends, get them kind of smoother, and you'll end up with another rack of ribs that comes out of this that are, again, it's quite tasty. Same process, score the ribs, and you can even use, we're going to use on some of these a set of chicken shears to trim away the ribs, but as you get towards the heavier ribs, you have to get the saw back out and work those heavy ribs instead of using the chicken shears. For the next part, you're going to be separating the backbone so that gets basically boned out. And what you're left with is the ability to cut between the ribs so you can get your chops. This is kind of tricky, awkward saw work, but eventually you get it to a point where you can sever that last little bits off with your knife. You also want to do a little bit of cleanup, get rid of some of that bone dust, maybe a little bit of the flesh or the sinew that you have hanging off, so you're prettying it up pretty much. Now we're down to the money part, the fun part. You just, because there's no bone, no backbone in there any longer, you can do 2 ribs or you can do 1 rib, and you cut those cutlets out all the way down from that midsection of the torso. For the other half of the midsection there, I decided to go ahead and bone that out because I got a little bit of a rough cut there with the saw. Wasn't particularly pleasing looking. So I pulled the backstrap. The ribs will be good ribs, and just cleaned up the backstrap. That's another tasty cut of meat. And what you finally got there is a stack of ribs, as well as some backstrap, and there's the tenderloins there as well, and then a whole pile of cutlets. For a lot of decades, I was out there doing the same thing that everyone's doing, butchering the hog in the field or cutting it into primals, not really getting fancy into the particular cuts and how you're breaking that deer down. But I'll tell you this, the presentation matters. When you take some of these small cutlets and they're spread across the plate, presentation matters. The first thing you look at on a plate, the first thing that you experience is the way it looks. Then you go into smell, then you go into taste. So somebody starts judging your meal right from the outset on how it looks. And some of these cuts present much better than just a hunk of deer meat sitting on the plate. You had to know that we were going to cook some up, a little bit of olive oil, and we love Cajun seasoning. It's not overpowering if you don't put too much, but it's a fantastic flavor. Cast iron skillet, high heat, do a quick fry on these, and they are a wonderful, easy, quick meal. As you know, you've got to be careful not overcooking venison. It's best when medium or less than that. We'll go ahead and let these rest for 5 minutes and then give you a taste test. Just look at the juices running out of that meat. So good. And who even says you need a knife? Got a perfect little handle right there. And even those little bits that you normally skip, they're attached to the red. Something else to chew on there. That's a picked clean rib. So YouTube says that this video is perfect for your viewing habits. This is my latest upload, and over here is a playlist you might just enjoy. I hope you liked it. If you did, please click like, subscribe, share, and come on back for more.